I still remember the way the cold night air bit into my skin as I stood on the front porch, my backpack slung over one shoulder, stuffed with whatever I could grab in the 2 minutes I was given. My stepfather, Greg, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face twisted in disgust. My mother was behind him, half hidden in the dim light of the hallway. She didn't say a word. She didn't even look me in the eye. "Don't come back, Alex," Greg said, his voice like gravel. "You think you're some kind of genius, huh? Sitting in your room all day, staring at that damn screen? You'll never be anything. You'll never make a dime from that garbage." I clenched my fists, fighting back every insult I wanted to throw at him. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Greg had never liked me, never respected me. Ever since he married my mom when I was 8, he saw me as nothing but an inconvenience. I wasn't the son he wanted, the obedient, sports-playing, real man type. I was just some nerd, some quiet kid who liked computers more than people. He had made his feelings clear for years. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was done pretending I was his responsibility. "You want to waste your life? Fine," he continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Go be a programmer or whatever the hell you think you are. But not under my roof. I won't have a worthless loser eating my food and wasting my money." I turned to my mom. She was still silent, still staring at the floor. My chest ached. She wasn't stopping him. She wasn't fighting for me. "Mom," I whispered. She flinched. Just barely. Then, in the smallest voice, she said, "You should go, Alex." And that was it. That was the moment I realized she was never going to choose me. No matter how much Greg belittled me, no matter how many times he called me a failure, she was never going to fight for me. Something inside me shattered. I swallowed the lump in my throat, turned, and stepped off the porch. The front door slammed behind me, sealing my fate. I walked. I didn't know where I was going, but I walked anyway. The neighborhood was quiet, the only sound was my own footsteps on the pavement. My head was spinning, my chest was tight. My own mother had let him throw me out. My own mother. I had nothing. No home. No money. No plan. All I had was my laptop, a cheap old thing I had saved up for by fixing neighbors' computers over the years. That, and a dream that Greg had laughed at every day since I was a kid. But I was going to prove him wrong. I didn't care if I had to sleep on the streets, starve for days, or work myself to death. I was going to prove him wrong. And one day, I was going to make sure he regretted every single word. The first night was the hardest. I didn't have anywhere to go. I crashed at a bus stop, my backpack clutched against my chest, shivering in the cold. My stomach ached with hunger, and my mind was racing. I had a few bucks in my wallet, but not enough to last. I had no home. No family. Just my laptop and a dream. The next day, I did the only thing I could. I started looking for work. I went to every cafe, every fast food place, every store in town. The answer was always the same: we're not hiring. Or worse, you need experience. How was I supposed to get experience if no one would give me a chance? By the third day, I was starving. I spent my last few dollars on the cheapest meal I could find, an old gas station sandwich. It was stale, but I didn't care. Then, that night, as I sat in the corner of a 24-hour diner, sipping a single cup of coffee to make it last, I made a decision. No one was going to help me. I had to help myself. I opened my laptop. The battery was low, but I still had a few hours. For years, programming had been my escape. I taught myself everything: Python, JavaScript, even some cybersecurity tricks. I had built small projects just for fun. Games, automation scripts, simple apps. But now, it wasn't a hobby anymore. It was survival. I went to freelance websites, looking for any gig I could find. Data entry. Bug fixes. Building simple websites. Anything. Most people ignored me. After all, I had no reviews, no credibility. But I refused to give up. Then, finally, at around 3 a.m., I got my first job. It was small, fixing a CSS issue on some random guy's WordPress site, $30. It wasn't much, but at that moment, it felt like a lifeline. I worked on it all night, finishing it by sunrise. When I got paid, I almost cried. This was it. This was my way out. The grind begins. That $30 turned into $50 the next day. Then $100 the next week. I spent my days in libraries, using free Wi-Fi to send emails, apply for gigs, and learn more. Every night, I coded until my eyes burned. I reinvested every dollar I made, getting better hardware, buying online courses, anything to level up. I took on bigger projects, custom websites, app development, even security consulting. At 17, I started making more money than my stepfather ever did. By 18, I had my own apartment. By 19, I had my own company. And by 21, I was a millionaire. I had built a cybersecurity startup, helping companies protect their data, stopping hackers before they struck. It took years of work, but now, I had everything Greg said I never would. A penthouse in the city. A team of brilliant engineers. Clients paying six figures just for a consultation. I had one. But then, one day, after all these years, my past came knocking. The email came late at night. At first, Alex thought it was a mistake, some spam message buried in his inbox. But then he saw the name. Greg Thompson. His stepfather. For a long time, he just stared at the screen, frozen. He hadn't heard from Greg or his mother in years. Not a single call. Not a single email. Nothing. They had erased him, and he had done the same. His chest felt tight, his mind flooded with memories of that night, the cold wind, the weight of his backpack, the way his mother couldn't even look at him. He almost deleted the email without reading it. Almost. But curiosity got the better of him. Alex, I know it's been a long time, but your mother and I need to talk to you. It's important. We need your help. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a request for help, like none of it ever happened. He closed his laptop. He told himself he wouldn't reply. He didn't owe them anything. But as much as he tried to ignore it, something in him wouldn't let it go. Not because he cared, he didn't, not anymore. But he wanted to see them squirm. He wanted to know why they suddenly needed him now, after all these years. So he sent a reply. Where and when? The response came within minutes. Your mother will be so happy to see you, Alex. Let's meet at Romano's on 5th. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. He scoffed at that. His mother. The same woman who had stood by and watched as he was thrown out into the streets. The same woman who hadn't lifted a damn finger to check if he was even alive. But tomorrow at 7, he would be there. And this time, he was the one in control. The restaurant was a high-end Italian place, the kind Greg would have never been able to afford when Alex was a kid. It was a statement, picking a place like this. He wanted them to know he had money now. That he was different. When he walked in, heads turned. He was no longer the scrawny, timid teenager they had kicked out. He was confident, dressed in a tailored suit, his watch worth more than what Greg used to make in a year. And then he saw them. Greg had aged badly. His once strong build had softened, his face lined with stress. His mother, though, looked almost the same, except now, there was something desperate in her eyes. For a moment, they just stared at him. Then Greg forced a smile. Alex, he said, standing up like they were old friends. Wow, look at you. All grown up. Alex didn't smile. He just sat down, adjusting his watch, making sure they saw it. Let's skip the small talk. You said you needed help. Greg cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. His mother reached for his hand, but he pulled back. It's our business, Greg finally said. We made some bad investments. It's been rough these last few years. Clients backed out, debts piled up, and now the bank is coming after the house. Your mother and I, we're losing everything. Alex watched him, expression unreadable. He could hear it in Greg's voice, that same arrogance, but now with an undercurrent of fear. We know you've done well, his mother added softly. And we were hoping, maybe, you could help us out. A loan, or. Alex let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. Unbelievable. You want my help? He asked, leaning forward. After everything? After throwing me out with nothing? After telling me I'd never amount to anything? Greg shifted uncomfortably. We were tough on you because we wanted you to do something real with your life, Alex. And look. It worked, didn't it? You wouldn't be where you are today if we hadn't pushed you. Alex's jaw tightened. The sheer audacity. You didn't push me, he said coldly. You abandoned me. His mother reached for his hand again. Please, Alex. We're family. That word hit him like a slap. Family. Where was family when he was sleeping in bus stops? When he was starving? When he had no one? He exhaled slowly, eyes darkening. Maybe it was time to show them exactly what kind of man they had created. Alex leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the table. For the first time in his life, Greg looked nervous. His mother, too, sat in silence, wringing her hands together like a woman on the verge of tears. They were expecting him to cave. They still thought of him as that desperate, helpless kid they had thrown away. But that kid was long gone. Alex smiled a slow, calculated smile that sent a flicker of unease across Greg's face. So let me get this straight, he said, voice calm. You threw me out. Told me I'd never be anything. And now, you want my money? Greg's jaw clenched. It's not like that, Alex. No? Alex tilted his head. Then tell me. What is it like? His mother leaned forward, her voice gentle. Honey, we made mistakes. We see that now. We didn't know how else to get through to you back then. Alex let out a sharp laugh. Oh, that's rich. Kicking me out was your way of helping me? We thought it would force you to be responsible, Greg cut in, a little too quickly. To get a real job, not waste your life on, he caught himself, but it was too late. Alex smirked. Programming? That's what you were about to say, wasn't it? Greg shut his mouth. That waste of time is what made me a millionaire, Alex continued, voice dangerously low. That garbage you mocked every day is the reason I have a penthouse, a company, and a bank account bigger than anything you could ever dream of. So tell me, Greg. What's it like? Watching the kid you threw away succeed beyond your wildest imagination? Greg swallowed hard, his usual arrogance faltering. His mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. We just need a second chance, she whispered. Please, Alex. We'll lose everything. Alex studied them for a moment. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing Greg like this, squirming, desperate. It was tempting to make him beg, to drag this out and watch him suffer. But he had a better idea. He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before sliding it across the table. Greg hesitated before picking it up. His eyes darted across the screen, confusion twisting into dread. What is this? Greg asked, voice unsteady. Alex's smirk widened. It's your company. Greg's head snapped up. You see, Greg, while I was waiting for this meeting, I did a little digging. And I have to say, I'm impressed. You really ran your business into the ground. Missed payments, lawsuits, fraud allegations, wow. I mean, it's actually impressive how badly you managed to screw this up. Greg's face turned red. You had no right. Oh, I had every right, Alex cut in smoothly. Because guess what? I just bought your company. Silence. His mother let out a quiet gasp. Greg looked at him like he had been slapped across the face. That's right, Alex continued, his voice mocking. It was easy, really. Your creditors were more than happy to sell off your assets to me at a discount. And now, Greg? I own you. Greg's hands trembled as he put the phone down. His face had gone pale. You can't, he swallowed. You wouldn't. Alex leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Watch me. His mother was crying now. Alex, please, we'll do anything. Just don't take everything from us. For a long moment, he just stared at her. The woman who had let him suffer. The woman who had stood by while her husband threw her son out like garbage. He had waited years for this moment. Years. And now, with everything in his hands, one question remained. Would he destroy them? Or would he walk away? Greg sat frozen, his fingers gripping the phone like a lifeline, his eyes darting across the screen as if he could somehow undo what had just happened. His mother had gone silent, her tear-filled eyes fixed on Alex. Alex could feel his heart pounding, but his face remained unreadable. He had imagined this moment for years, had built it up in his mind as the ultimate revenge. And yet, now that it was here, it felt different. He had them in the palm of his hand. One word from him, and they would lose everything. His mother spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex, please. I know we failed you. I know we hurt you. Her hands trembled as she reached across the table, but Alex pulled back before she could touch him. Her face crumpled. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to fight for you. Alex's jaw clenched. But you didn't. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was scared. He let out a bitter laugh. Scared? His voice was sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. I was 16. I had nothing. Do you know what it's like to sleep in a bus stop in the middle of winter? To starve for days because no one will hire you? Do you have any idea what it's like to be completely alone? She let out a small, choked sob, and for a moment, he saw it, guilt. Good. She deserved to feel it. Greg finally found his voice. We thought you'd come crawling back, he admitted, his voice hollow. We thought you'd realize you couldn't make it without us. And when you didn't, when we never heard from you, he shook his head, rubbing a hand down his face. We convinced ourselves you were fine. That you were doing it just to spite us. Alex stared at him, waiting for the anger to return. Waiting for that deep, burning hatred to take over. But it didn't. Instead, all he felt was tired. He exhaled slowly, fingers tapping against the table. Is that what this is? He asked. You convinced yourselves I was fine, so you never had to feel guilty? You told yourselves I was choosing to stay away, so you wouldn't have to admit what you did to me? His mother wiped her eyes. I thought about you every day, Alex. Every day. He studied her carefully. He wasn't sure if he believed her. Greg, on the other hand, couldn't even look at him. The man who had once mocked him for being weak now sat there, defeated. Alex could destroy him. Right now. With a single call, he could fire him, seize what was left of his assets, ensure that Greg Thompson would never recover. And yet, as much as he wanted to hurt him, as much as he wanted Greg to feel just a fraction of what he had felt, something inside him held back. Would it even matter? Would ruining them really change anything? His whole life, Greg had told him he would never be anything. That he would fail. That he was worthless. And yet, here he was. He had won. Greg was already ruined not by Alex, but by his own arrogance, his own failures. He didn't need Alex to destroy him. He had done that all by himself. The revenge he had dreamed of for years suddenly felt pointless. Alex let out a slow breath, then reached for his phone. Greg tensed, but Alex didn't call the bank. He didn't fire him. Instead, he pulled up the ownership documents, tapped a few times, and slid the phone back across the table. Greg hesitated before looking at the screen, and when he did, his face crumpled in confusion. You? His voice faltered. "You're giving it back?" Alex leaned back in his chair, watching him carefully. "You're not worth my time, Greg," he said simply. "You never were." Greg flinched, and for the first time, Alex saw it, shame. His mother let out a quiet sob. "Alex." He stood up, adjusting his watch. "I didn't do it for you," he said. "I did it because I don't need revenge. I have everything I need." Greg swallowed hard, looking like he wanted to say something, but Alex didn't give him the chance. He turned and walked away, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. And for the first time in his life, he felt free. The city lights stretched before him as Alex stepped out of the restaurant, the cold night air brushing against his face. He took a deep breath, feeling something unexpected settle in his chest, peace. For years, he had carried his past like a weight, dragging it with him through every sleepless night, every grueling hour of work. He had built his empire with the fury of a boy who had been abandoned, convinced that success was the only way to erase the pain. And now, after finally standing face to face with the people who had wronged him, he realized something. They weren't worth his anger anymore. Greg had already destroyed himself. His mother had already lost the one thing that should have mattered most, her son. Alex didn't need revenge. He had already won. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Damien, his business partner. "You coming back to the office? That new contract just came in." Alex stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "Not tonight." For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to bury himself in work, to prove himself to anyone. He had nothing left to prove. A part of him had wondered if walking away would leave him feeling empty. If, without revenge, the hole in his chest would still be there. But as he looked up at the skyline, at the city that he had conquered on his own, he realized the hole wasn't there anymore. He had spent years believing that the only way to truly be free was to destroy the people who had hurt him. But freedom wasn't revenge. Freedom was letting go. He hailed a cab, giving the driver his address. As the car pulled away from the restaurant, he didn't look back. Greg and his mother were just ghosts now, faded memories from a past that no longer controlled him. And Alex? Alex was finally free.